So students often say that they need grade 9 context and they struggle the most with this with the romantic poems. So I'm going to go over some grade 9 context for romantic poetry. So firstly, we have the romantic movement. Now we have the core beliefs and the movement itself. So the romantic movement was a time in the late 1700s and early 1800s when some poets and artists began to focus more on feelings, imagination and nature. Now this is instead of logic, science and rules and reason and all those things, and that was really a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. So the Age of Reason was when people were making progress, constant progress, scientific progress, progress with machinery. Cities were being built up, people were experiencing more and more establishments and power being very much controlled. So this became a kind of way to rebel against that. So it was more about human connection, it was more about nature. And the core beliefs of the Romantics were that creativity was superior to reason and knowledge and constantly searching for more and more. They want you to look at the power of nature. They want you to revolt against the people who try to take your power away from you and try to make you feel like you are less than them. They focused on marginalised people. Now, marginalised means not to be treated well in society. So there is a focus on children and the poor. British romantic poets like Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, Shelley, Byron and Blake were specifically focused on this and the idea that the working class were being massively exploited. I will link this back to some of the poems that you might study if you are doing AQA GCSE anthologies in a second. But there was a massive focus on the poor, the vulnerable, the people in society that were most marginalised, that were treated the worst. So there's another focus on religion. So many saw Romantics as against religion, but that was actually a really narrow way to view it. Now, if you do London by William Blake, he does say the blackening church appalls. But William Blake was a very, very religious man, but he believed in faith over organised religion. Because the problem with organised religion is you have a hierarchy. So there are people at the top of the church, and he believed that those people often exploited their power rather than really being good Christians and going out and helping the poor and the marginalised and helping people find God. He thought that they were using a lot of the church's resources for themselves. He also thought that when you organised religion and you forced sets of rules into things, it stopped that idea of faith as well. So he believed that it took away from truth, faith and connection, and the people in power in the church were often using the resources poorly. Now this kind of links to that poverty and the oppressed focus that they have. There's a lot of sympathy for the lower classes and people being exploited by society. We see again that word marginalised groups. All Romantics believed we could use our imaginations to heal us of our suffering and we could see the world as a better place. They thought that the class system and establishments were completely unnatural. They thought that these were something that we made up in our head, something that we could easily rebel against. They were very, very influenced and inspired by places that did rebel against this. For example, the French Revolution, where they rebelled against their monarchy. They thought that these unnatural systems caused poverty and suffering because it was forcing some people into a certain bracket. It was forcing some people to work a certain way, and then others just kind of were born into wealth that they didn't really deserve. So there was a real focus on rebelling against that because people were using their power incorrectly, and those people who were marginalised were kept marginalised. They were consistently harmed because society constantly exploited them. So poverty and the oppressed is something that comes through quite a lot. Now we've got the sublime and where it comes from. The sublime is something that kind of comes away from everything that I've been talking about so far. So obviously I've been talking a lot about cities and oppression, and I've been talking a lot about establishment, but the sublime is completely different to that. It's the opposite. It's actually what they thought made life worth living. So the Romantics were inspired by the environment. They wanted people to go out into these new territories. They wanted the world to seem like this beautiful place with so much potential, and they didn't want you to be pushed into this tiny little box in this tiny little city, suffering for your entire life. So a key idea is the sublime. And that's the feeling that people get when they go and see these landscapes that cause awe, which is where the word awesome comes from. You look at them and you are frightened because they're so huge and so big and so immortal, but you're also feeling a lot of admiration and a lot of amazement for them, because when you go out into them, you think that they look absolutely fantastic and wonderful. And this comes from the feeling that people experienced when they saw something really powerful and beautiful, but also terrifying. Going out into the world and seeing that you aren't the most important thing and actually nature is all powerful, that's a real mix of awe and fear that you might be feeling there. So you realize how small and fragile humans are when you compare them to the universe. And it does come from a Latin word that means exalted or uplifted. So again, it's about this big realization that going out into nature is this spiritual experience. And when you venture out into the natural world, you can see the most wonderful, awe-inspiring things, but they also remind you that you're just human and life is temporary. And that leads us on to transience here. So the Romantics saw everything as temporary, which is transient. They thought that nature was eternal, but humanity needed to accept that power for them was temporary. Life, beauty, everything is temporary. Everything fades, everything disappears. And we needed to have a real thought about that and a real understanding of that, because they saw the power of nature as being completely eternal. And we see this in a lot of Romantic poems where they focus on the fact that human life and everything else is very temporary. So because of that, we do see this pastoral focus. They idealize the countryside and a more natural way of living. So I want you to think about simple living here: herding sheep, growing your own vegetables, milking cows, those sorts of things. And Wordsworth in particular was known for his love of the Lake District. He believed that living away from these industrial places was really the true state of man, and this is where they could enjoy being human more than if they live in a city that's really built up and focuses on gain and focuses on getting things and getting more money and living in this very oppressive system where if you're poor, you are pushed to be poor, and there are people with obscene wealth like the monarchy living there too, looking down on the people who are poor. So they really valued that simple living, that pastoral scene, the countryside, those sorts of things too. Now, if you're doing Power and Conflict, you see that in the prelude. You see the pastoral scene, the beautiful, wonderful lake that he goes into. You see transience and how temporary human power is and how temporary human life is. He has this sublime realization that nature is huge, but he's also quite frightened about it. And there's an enduring power of nature. We see London, where there's that idea on religion as well, the blackening church, the city as really corrupt, and establishments like the monarchy as really corrupt. We see in London, he talks about that industrialized city as a really negative place that he doesn't actually want to be. And we see it in Ozymandias too. So the transience, the temporary human power that Ozymandias thought was going to be eternal and people would remember him through this wonderful statue. But actually the statue is completely broken down. The monarchy is corrupt, the heart that mocked them and the hand that fed. The pastoral in some ways, because we do see those lone and level sands at the end stretching far away. So we see that beautiful desert landscape that carries on despite the fact that this entire empire has fallen. We see the enduring power of nature as well. And if you are doing Worlds and Lives, we see England in 1819. We see oppression, exploiting the poor, and we do see that sort of link to rebellion as well. And that idea that there's so much sort of corruption of establishments and power. And human power is really transient in England in 1819 as well. We see lines written in early spring, where we see humanity and nature again. We see the sublime in some ways, and we see this emotional connection to nature. And we see where this is sort of a reflection on nature and humanity and what it means and what the real connection between the two is. So if you are doing Power and Conflict in Worlds and Lives, hopefully this was a really useful video for you, and you can see the context coming through in a lot more detail about what the Romantics did. Like, subscribe, and don't forget to tell me anything that you would like to see me do any notes on for you. Thank you.